Adam paused to look up mid-bite of his food, as a large Shovanti Marine sat in the seat across from him in the frigate's chow hall. Sel, Classy and himself had been riding on this ship back to Fayara for the past 2 days, after the instructors had essentially given them the boot and let them undergo the final exam of the course early. Whether this was because of their display with the noble recruits, a desire to get them out from under their noses as fast as possible, the emergency orders to return to the unit, or a combination of all three, he would never know. "So, are you looking to fight, fuck, or just curious about the human death's head?" Adam asked, resuming his bite. "Oh, no, I just, the last option," she said, clearly flustered. After having spent months now with the large aliens, he'd learned they were easily flustered when being pressed by a male, instead of just outright stonewalling them. He'd met a couple male stewards on this ship, and while they were perfectly nice to him, they definitely tended to be ice queens around the women, as he'd previously joked. "Well," he said, settling down his fork next to the half-eaten meat patty, "what do you want to know?" "Well, she trailed off, going blue in the face. If he was being honest, she was rather cute. Clearly just over the age of enlistment. Cute face on a decently muscled 7-foot-tall frame, if not taller. How? How what? He asked, furrowing his brow. How did this happen? She asked, gesturing to his armor. He'd taken to wearing the plates and armor suit around the ship whenever he was alone, not really wanting to find himself in another situation like the one he'd found himself in on the frigate, shortly after leaving Earth. "What, me being a death's head, or me being here specifically?" he asked, gesturing to the mess hall. "Death's head," she said excitedly, clearly happy that this male wasn't stonewalling her attempt at conversation. "Long story. Short version is that I rescued a podmate from an ambush, and they liked me so much that they decided to keep me around." He finished with a shrug. "How'd you rescue a death's head? My sergeant says they're unkillable," she replied, her meal long forgotten. "Humans are really good at killing shit, I guess. I suppose it was a situation of unstoppable force meets immovable object." "You saved her from your friends?" she asked, clearly enraptured by his story. "Not my friends. You call them traitors to the Empress, I call them insurgents. Just couldn't let her die like that, I suppose." He mentally winced at her insinuation that he was part of their unit, because, well, a couple of years ago he would have fought right beside them, if been less rapey while doing it. "So, where is she?" the woman asked. "Back with the pod," he said, putting a bite of food to his mouth. "I had to get a selection after all." "Does that mean that you like Shovanti girls?" she asked, sending his brain for a loop. Shovanti women tended to be a little bit tone-deaf when it came to pursuing men, and this one was clearly trying to head down that route in a rather tactless manner. Adam sighed deeply, setting down his fork and steepled his fingers. "Okay, I'm going to tell you the same thing I've told the 8 other girls who approached me in the last 2 days, he said, looking her in the eyes with a serious gaze. "Yes, I do like Shovanti women. No, I'm not gay like you may believe from human porn that somehow found its way to the datanet. And no, I'm not turning you down because I find you unappealing. I'm turning you down because I have a committed relationship with a podmate, and now I've got 2 others eagerly waiting in line. My dance card is full, and while I'm happy to chat and hang out as a fellow member of the Imperial military, nothing more can or will happen, despite what your lower brain is telling you." Okay. I'm starting to get why Shovanti males act the way they do, he thought, as he watched the woman's expression falter before she suddenly stood up from her seat and left, taking her tray back to her previous seat with what he assumed was her pod. Of course, the members of the unit were joking and poking fun at her for striking out with the cute guy, as he'd witnessed multiple times so far. He shook his head, finding their antics not all that different from his own back when he would bar hug with Alec back on Earth before the invasion. He finished his meal, returned the tray, and left for the pod room. As he meandered in the purple halls, getting the leery glances from the Marines, which he'd now learned to ignore, he became faintly aware of the sound of feet walking nearby in step with him from behind. He stopped and turned around rapidly, and Classy nearly impacted him bodily, her slightly slower reflexes and mass hindering her ability to stop on a dime. "Hey, Classy, what's up?" he asked pensively, not entirely sure why the usually reclusive woman would be following him so closely. Can we talk somewhere private?" she asked in a small voice, barely audible under her fabric, half-face mask, and the din of conversation in the hallways. "Yeah, sure," he said, shrugging and walking behind her. She led him down a twisting corridor and into a small room with dark walls. He looked around as she hit a button, the 3 walls opposite the doorway lighting up white for a few moments. "What is this place?" he asked, before the walls displayed images of the warping space around the ship as it traveled faster than light. "It's an observation room, typically used by officers to relax, or Dev says in this case," she said, taking a seat against one of the screens after locking the door. "So," Adam started, tearing his eyes away from the enrapturing display of space passing by, and taking his seat across from the princess. "What did you want to talk about, Yandara?" She shot him a raised eyebrow at the usage of her name, clearly not accustomed to people using it in her unit. She breathed deeply, and exhaled before pulling her mask down to her neck and leaning forward. "I'm worried," she said cryptically. "About what?" "In the car, after we left the prison, you said you had an idea to get around my mother's plan. I spent the last 2.5 days trying to wrap my brain around what you meant by that, and I think I know. And so, I'm worried what the others will say," she said, her shoulders sagging as she refused to meet his gaze. "Worried they'll say no?" he asked, chuckling slightly. "I'm worried they'll say yes," she blurted out, finally looking him in the eyes. "I'm worried they'll say yes, and then I know I'll accept and drag all of you into the political sea of souls that was my life before I joined the commandos." She put both of her hands to her face and shot a breath through them before returning her palms to her knees. "I'm worried that I'll get you hurt, Adam. Political life, particularly at the level of the royal family, is very cutthroat. I don't want to see the 3 of you chewed up and spit out because I'm being selfish with my desires," she said, leaning her head back against the screen behind her with a soft thud. "Princess," he said, earning a small glare from the woman, "I'm not fragile. I was fighting wars for 4 years before you guys even showed up, and in the 4 years since. My adult life has been nothing but cutthroat conflict. If I have to deal with a little more from some pampered royals to make sure your life isn't miserable, I will." "But do you even like me?" she asked, leaning forward. "How can you take this risk with someone you barely know?" "You're absolutely right," he said, crossing his arms and leaning back. "I am attracted to you, but right now that's only surface level, because you've sequestered yourself away from me the entire time I've known you. So here's my deal. Let's go on a couple of dates while we have the time off, get to know each other better. Then, if we decide this," he said, gesturing between the 2 of them, "works for us, we can announce it to your family and stop all the bullshit early. Does that work for you?" She opened her mouth, licking her canines as she clearly pondered this question. I can do that, yes," she said, nodding her head, before a sardonic smile crossed her face. "Do I at least get a kiss from my new man?" she asked in a teasing tone, clearly meaning it as a joke. Adam decided to be impertinent. He stood up quickly and walked over to the cute noble, cupping her jaw in his hand. "Well," she got out, him planting a deep kiss in her lips as she tensed up. She eased into his embrace, lips parting slightly as he danced his tongue across them. He pulled back after a few seconds, looking at her deeply indigo face as she blushed cutely, before the predatory look in her eyes returned. She boldly grabbed him by his chest plate, putting him to the seat next to her. He barely had a moment after his ass hit the padded bench before she straddled him and kissed him lustfully. "As long as it's just kissing, it's okay, right?" he thought, as her long tongue darted between his lips. She broke the kiss to breathe before he trailed kisses along her neck and jaw, gripping her hips firmly with his hands. "Oh, Adam," she trailed off, as he planted a small bite on her jugular. "I've wanted you since I—" She was cut off by him returning to her lips, finding enjoyment in flustering the alien princess. "Ferry will be okay with this, right?" he thought, as he moved his hands upwards. His hands stopped just under her breasts, gripping her ribcage tightly as he felt her grind against him through their suits. "Saw you on that mountaintop," she said, as he broke the kiss, both of their chests heaving at their activities. "It's why I avoided you." "You're avoiding me, specifically?" he asked, as she stopped her grinding, both of them clearly coming to their senses. "Yes, I'm sorry," she said, looking down and to the side, avoiding his gaze again. "Like I said before, I wanted to keep the team, and by extension you, shielded from my family. I could handle myself around the others, but you, I wouldn't be able to stop myself." She finished as she gestured to their very compromising position. "You're gonna have to tell them, you know," he said, realizing that he couldn't keep this from Ferry and Slip no matter how hard he tried. Cell too, if the other 2 were okay with her. She grimaced at his words, looking back to him with a pained expression before sighing deeply. "You're right," she said softly. "Fuck, if I'm telling them, what's the use of keeping the secret from Popper too?" "And Cell," he said, about to add his mental qualifier before she cut him off. Oh, they'll be fine, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. The fact that she's a night crew won't matter. She's clearly a distinguished member of the Empress's service and head over heels for you. She'll fall right in with the team, she added, before canting ahead and grinning mischievously. And right into our bed. Our bed? He asked, raising his brows. Yes. It's tradition for a marriage to sleep in one large bed. Oh, fuck, she said, clearly panicking at her talk about marriage, to which Adam laughed deeply at her gaffe. I didn't mean... She panicked and started. It's okay, I've been married before, he interrupted with a dismissive hand wave of his own. And besides, doesn't a plan for stopping your mother arranging a marriage to someone she just wants for political means for us to get married within a year's time instead? She stopped suddenly, looking into his eyes with a confused expression. You were married? What happened? Will you tell me about your wives? She asked, concern clear in her expression. Just one. We got married shortly before I left the Rangers. She got vaporized by a wayward orbital bombardment, along with our house. I'm so sorry, she said, pulling him against her chest in a decidedly soft embrace. When she released him, her expression was hard. Let me guess. The officers wrote her off as collateral damage? Yeah. It's why I joined the fight against you guys initially. Pushed me over the edge, he responded, not really wanting to go into depth with his militia past. Do you know who ordered the strike? Not a clue, he said, finally meeting her gaze. I will see to it that both the gunnery officer and the observer who caught it in are formally reprimanded at a royal level. The Imperium has started to take civilian casualties too lightly as of late, and although I can't stop them all, I can at least give you some closure. She leaned back atop him, arms resting gently on his shoulders. He was taken aback by her attitude, especially for a noble. All of the nobility he'd met up until now were aloof, spoiled and borderline sociopathic, which was telling despite his small sample size. Classy, for all her avoidance and absence from his life until this point, had opened up significantly. You don't have to do that, he got out, before a large finger was pressed to his lips. Adam, it is the sacred duty of the nobility, bestowed upon us by the goddess and the Empress herself, to protect those beneath us. We're supposed to be the shield and strong arm of the commoners. To provide an example of the kind of woman all should aspire to be, she said, as she removed the finger. This is what I need to do as a noble, not just as your girlfriend. Does that make sense? He nodded, unable to say anything. Too many confusing emotions rolling in his head as she stood up from his lap, pulling him along with her. But besides that, she started, as he made it to his feet, the honesty between me and our team needs to start with Sel. You trust her, right? With my life, he replied, understanding where she was leading him to. Then we will go tell her, both about the plan and my identity, she said, decisively, pulling her mask back over her face. She led the way down the winding halls, her tan and grey painted armour clearly identifying her as a death's head, even if her mask hid her true identity. When they made it to the small pod bay he and Sel were bunked in during their short voyage, which would end sometime the next day, she looked up from her omnipad at Adam and Classy. Oh, hey there, cutie. Who's your friend? I didn't realise there was another pod of death heads on this ship, she said, rising to her feet and practically bouncing over to the pair. Sel, he said, motioning for her to calm down. There isn't another pod aboard the ship. This is Classy. One of our pod, actually. Oh, that's cool. Why is she here? She cut off, as Princess Yandara Tasu lowered the mask, after shutting and locking the door behind them. Holy shit! The princess is a... She got off, before Adam jumped and clamped a hand over her mouth. A death's head, he said quietly. Sel looked at him with a panicked expression. A death's head who wants to keep her identity a secret from everyone who isn't part of the pod. So keep it down, please? Sorry, she said, just barely above a whisper. But why? Don't you have everything you want as a noble? Listen, he said, interrupting her again. We need to talk.